singer, songwriter, storyteller, world traveler. Orit Shimoni has 5 albums to her credit. The first few under the stage name Little Birdie, more recently under her own name. When she was growing up, Orit and her family moved a lot. She spent her high school years in Calgary. Since then, she has lived in Jerusalem, Montreal, Berlin, and now she doesn't really live anywhere. She keeps a mailing address in Calgary, but for the most part, she's a full-time touring musician. You might have seen her if you've taken the Via Rail Canadian train between Vancouver and Toronto. She's got a semi-regular gig playing her way across the country on the train. Orit Shimoni is back in Alberta this month, and she's my guest today on the Key of A.
What if grief outweighs the intention, outweighs the now, undoes you somehow? What if the...
Welcome to the Key of A.
Thank you very much.
You're a world traveler,
Yes.
but you're back at your kind of home base in Calgary right now.
It's got enough memories from long ago to definitely be one of the home bases.
Right, right. How did you get your start in music?
Oh, I don't know what to consider my start.
What got you interested in music?
The hippie movement of the 60s, which I didn't belong to.
Right, you're too young for that.
I'm too young for that, but when I first came across it, I always loved music. Apparently, I sang before I talked.
Okay.
It was always in my veins, and then listening to whatever the oldies radio station was when I grew up in Calgary. I just fell in love with songs, and I always loved singing.
And when did you start writing songs?
Well, I started writing horrible songs when I was in high school.
Didn't we all?
Yeah, I don't know. They were, I think, a little more vague and self-absorbed than they've evolved into now. But yeah, around high school.
And when you first released an album, you went under the name Little Birdie.
Yeah.
Why did you choose Little Birdie?
I didn't think that's going to be an obstacle to you in any way. But I know it was the very same kind of undoing that kind of logic that made me go back to using it. Like, no, Canada's all about being whatever.
Right,
yeah.
Right, yeah. I'm embracing diversity and uniqueness of people. And being an artist, you want to play up the uniqueness as well.
I don't know if I have to play it up. I'm a weirdo.
Okay. Well, we'll get to what makes you such a weirdo in a bit. But I was really intrigued by a beautiful quote on your website about words. And you say, I'm in love with words. Words are what give breath meaning. That was a beautiful line. How's your relationship with words changed over the years?
That's a good question. I think that I might take it a little more for granted now.
Okay.
I think there was a period where I discovered I had a very good relationship with language, and I'm fascinated by it, like philosophically, spiritually, mystically, grammatically, linguistically. It's just an amazing thing. And I think that nowadays it's just a given to me that I'm a songwriter, which is a really interesting evolution. It took a really long time to feel that way. And so songs kind of pop out and I go, oh, there's another one, and move on.
Well, why don't we listen to one of your songs right now? A song called Song for the Awkward. Tell me about that one.
Well, I think I wrote it in response to people expressing a lot of surprise that I considered myself awkward and introverted and what do you mean? You're a performer. You seem so confident and you're so outgoing. I go, yeah, but now there's all these studies showing that you can be both.
Right. Yes.
And I've just always felt, like no matter how confident and outgoing I become, I still have this core awkwardness that I know a lot of other people have. And so it's a song for them and me and all of us.
Orit Shimoni, Song for the Awkward on the Key of A on CBC Radio 1.
If you can't hold still when somebody is looking on, find a quiet moment in a quiet place. You can reach and pretend that you've always known such
listening to the music of Orit Shimoni. That was a song called Song for the Awkward, for those of us introverts who have to pretend to be extroverts. Orit Shimoni is my guest today on the Key of A on CBC Radio 1. I'm Katherine Duncan. So you went to high school in Calgary, then went to Montreal.
I went to Jerusalem, actually, between Calgary and Montreal.
Oh, just a little side trip.
Just a little, why not?
And how did that go?
Oh, that was a very intense period of my life because I was, trying to be an adult. I was desperate to be an adult when I was about 12, so I could finally, go out into the world and had my university life, my first kind of relationships that weren't, sneaking around when I still lived with my parents kind of relationships. So that, it was a really just like my first real efforts at becoming who I was. But in the context of an incredibly complex and rather anguishing political world. And when I moved there, it was actually a peak of optimism. The peace treaty had just been signed, and there was a I don't want to get too political, but a left-wing government, and over the 6 years of living there, it really collapsed into a chaotic horribleness of violence, and it definitely affected me deeply, and still does. Yeah.
So you chose to come back to Canada.
Yeah.
After that.
Yeah.
And settled in Montreal.
Yep. Home of Leonard Cohen. That was one of the.
Was that one of the draws?
Yeah, definitely.
So what year are we talking that you got to Montreal, just to place it?
2000 and somewhere in 2003.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so just kind of as Arcade Fire and that whole sort of indie music movement was kind of just about to take off in Montreal.
Right before that. Montreal was definitely a happening. It was a great place for me to land, and I didn't know it in advance, but everything really important musically to me happened there. It started there.
And then you moved to Berlin.
Yeah.
What drew you there?
And I floundered and fluttered for a few months trying to figure out a touring route in Canada. And I just had this goal, like if I could do 2 or 3 shows in Europe, then I'd feel like I was on my way.
Like you were a real musician.
Like I was a real musician. And I'd met a bunch of musicians from Berlin. Process being there, the history of the place was so intense and personally relevant to me that just this chaotic, wild, totally not like Canada music scene and art scene, and just this weird kind of freedom, but terrifying sense of freedom also. And all I knew to do was write songs. So I said, okay, write 10 songs, and then if you have to run away at the end of it, at least you'll have an album. So
to be on tour as opposed to living somewhere you were going to live on tour.
Yes.
How did you make that choice?
I was, again, there was no plan there at all. I had a visa to be in Berlin for a year, and then it was up, and I came back to Canada, and I didn't have a place, but I had a tour booked. So I thought, what this paralysis of choice kind of situation where I could live anywhere. So not knowing where I wanted to live, I thought, I'll do this tour. I'll give it a couple of months and then I'll figure it out. And on that tour, I thought, wait a minute, I want a tour. I love touring. On tour, I have to look for places to stay. If I had a place, I'd be looking for sublets. Like, it would just be so, why do I actually need a place? If I just keep touring, maybe I can do without one. And I never thought it.
Put up another song for us right now.
So we're going to listen to a song called Haven't Got a Clue, which I realized eventually was a really good thing. I'm all for not having a clue, because this very much sort of the open road that I live on, and it's very true for my life, but I think it's actually quite accurate for everybody, and might be a better way to understand ourselves is we don't know. And if we admit we don't know, we probably do better in the world than when we think we know.
This is Orit Shimoni. Haven't got
other time and thought, if this is all we know, then what are we to do but speak with candid.
That's Orit Shimoni on her Bare Bones acoustic album, a song called Haven't Got a Clue. And Orit Shimoni is my guest today on Key of A on CBC Radio 1. So you are on tour all the time, pretty much.
Yeah.
And what is great about, I mean, I'm sure it's a double-edged sword, so let's start with the best thing about it. What do you love about being on tour?
Absolutely, hands down, just the encounters with so many different people and the conversations that I get to have, for sure. I mean, it's nice to, walk down a canal in Amsterdam and look at, but I'm not really a tourist type. I just really love meeting people.
And so the reverse of that must also be true in a certain sense, that you're always alone with people you've just met, or people that, with potential friends, I guess, a lot of the time. But what's difficult about touring?
I think you nailed it. There is a really strange kind of solitude that goes with, switching spaces really, really frequently. And so, I'm the only common thread. So this strange solitude of moving quickly through places for sure is difficult. But also, I don't get very much real solitude, and I need that to process all of the encounters. And so sometimes it's, as an introvert, like we said before, I don't have enough time, or it's really hard to balance that to, just to get the work done that's involved with touring is sometimes hard to do.
I guess, because if you're on public transport, you told me that you don't drive, so you're not driving your own van, right? So you're on public transport when the big word about that is public.
Right. So that might be an advantage because I can take out a notebook and write. Whereas if I was driving, now I'm no expert on driving, but pretty sure jotting down things in a notebook is a bad idea.
It's a very bad idea. Yeah. Quite right. What's your favorite mode of travel?
I've come to really love the train, but that's partly because I perform a lot on the Via Rail musician program.
Tell me about that. How does that work?
So great. You get accepted if you're lucky, and then you perform 3 sets a day on a train called the Canadian, which goes Toronto to Vancouver.
Nice. Now, while you're back in Alberta, and in particular Calgary, you have a show at the Ironwood.
Yes.
What's going to be happening that night? Tell us all about that. Now, we have listeners all across Alberta.
I know.
Great, one more song to send you out. What would you like to do?
I'm going to give you the last song on my 5th album, which was recorded with phenomenal Toronto blues and jazz musicians for a change. That's another thing I love about my life is I get to work with whoever because I'm solo. And this song is called These Things, and it's a little bit about not being able to take it all with you, except for the memories.
All right, Shimoni, thanks for coming in.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
These Things by Orit Shimoni on the Kiev CBC Radio 1.